For the first time since I became head of the studio, I finally had some job security.
Now it's garbage.
We had put together a string of hits, including Rosemary's Baby, Harold and Maude, The Odd Couple, True Grit, and Love Story. In 1970, we finally reached the mountaintop. That air smelled mighty good up there. Of all the major studios, Paramount was now in first place. It's hard to believe that just 4 years earlier, we were in ninth. It was the beginning of what would become the golden era of the new Hollywood. Over the next 4 years, we would collect 144 Oscar nominations, stay number one, and go through a streak of hits that to this day is unprecedented.
Baby, baby, it's a wild world. I'll always remember you.
So Hollywood in the 70s got a new nickname called New Hollywood. The reason why it's called New Hollywood is because the studio system was finally dead. It was no longer the way the business was run. And New Hollywood is essentially the business structure of Hollywood that is still, for the most part, in place today. Now, this was established by a few different things, a few films that we've talked about. The Graduate showed that Americans could laugh about sex. The Bonnie and Clyde, like we watched last week, showed how Americans could handle violence. And MASH, a show that inspired a very popular television show, was the very first American film to drop the F-bomb. And so the decade of the 70s, the New Hollywood decade, is chronicled in the book Easy Riders, Raging Bulls by Peter Biskin. It's a very, very, very good book about this era. So if these films that we talk about and the directors that we talk about interest you, I strongly recommend reading that book. It's a very, very, very good one. So New Hollywood was a result of a perfect storm. As we talked about last week, you had the corporate takeovers and you have the MPAA ratings. This is important because the MPAA ratings freed up filmmakers to make whatever content they wanted to. You could have explicit violence, you could have nudity, profanity, all these things we are definitely going to see in The Godfather. The corporate takeovers was very important as well because throughout most of the 70s, the corporations hadn't gone totally corporate with Hollywood, meaning that they hadn't really gotten too involved. So they were just basically writing blank checks, here, go make a movie, and hopefully it'll make a profit. So this allowed filmmakers to make basically whatever they wanted to. And all these filmmakers wanted to do was break the rules. And they did so with a high degree of technical skill. Because another part of the New Hollywood was that this was the first generation of film school directors. People who had gone to college and studied film with the intention of making films as a career. Previously, there were directors who just kind of worked their way up the ranks and they were good at ordering people around. Now, some of these folks did wonderful jobs, but these were people who actually studied the nuances of film. And so they took the technical skill to a whole new level. Many of these guys also, the directors that we're going to talk about tonight, actually got their start in independent cinema rather than working their way up through the studio because they had these visions that they wanted to create. And in a lot of ways, I'm not saying that this didn't exist before the 1970s, but in a lot of ways, this is where we have true artistic filmmaking and true cinematic filmmaking really become part of the norm. When we take a look at New Hollywood films as a whole, we can see some definite trends. Number one, they're definitely anti-authoritarian. Keep in mind, this is the hippie generation, the counterculture guys who are making these films. And so the one thing that they definitely did not want to be was establishment. And so a lot of these films are small rebel forces, like in Star Wars, or people who are dramatically against kind of order, politicians, cops, things of that nature. These are definitely anti-authoritarian films. As I said, there's a high degree of artistry. These are technically well-made films. There's lots of metaphor and lots of symbolism in New Hollywood films. Like I said, a lot of nuances. Another thing they did is what's called a deconstruction of a genre. A deconstruction of a genre is where you take a genre and you're not necessarily making fun of it, but you are exploring the genre and taking the genre to new levels. For example, what Mel Brooks was doing with something like Blazing Saddles or Young Frankenstein or basically most of his films. These are true parodies, but in doing the parody, he is illustrating what the genre had become. Because a genre is a genre because you see the same thing over and over and over again, and that leads to cliches. And drawing the audience attention to those cliches, in essence, is deconstructing the genre. And then you could rebuild it and do something different with it. As we'll see in The Godfather, the gangster genre is very much alive, but it's not a typical gangster story like we had seen in the 1930s. So more on that after we have a chance to watch the film. Another trend, and I don't want to ruin any movies for you, so no spoilers, but often you have downbeat endings. A downbeat ending is where the movie ends on a very harshly pessimistic note. I'll ruin one movie for you, the movie All That Jazz, which came out the same year as The Godfather. As a matter of fact, Bob Fosse won Best Director over Francis Ford Coppola in 1972 for All That Jazz. And at the end of this movie, the main character has a heart attack and dies. And that's it. That's the end of the movie. Quite literally, the movie ends with a corpse in a body bag, and the body bag zipping shut. That's a downbeat ending, okay? It's not a happy ending. Again, keep in mind, like the New Wave guys, the guys in New Hollywood, they wanted to do what you didn't see in a Hollywood picture. And so in the classic Hollywood style, you have a happy ending. Now with gangster films, okay, you often had a downbeat ending in a way because the gangster is dead. Now we're not supposed to like the gangster in the gangster film. He's supposed to be the villain. And so even though the gangster dies, that isn't really considered a downbeat ending because he's supposed to die. Keep that in mind when you watch The Godfather, and keep that in mind when you watch movies from the 70s. Another thing about New Hollywood films is that they're often very dark. They're often very cynical. Keep in mind, Watergate was happening 1973, 1974. You have the Kent State Massacre, 1972. You have Vietnam raging up till 1975. You have the Altamont stabbing in the 1970. So again, there's a lot of these really, you have the Charles Manson murders in the late 60s. You have a lot of things that were affecting public's consciousness, and it was not a happy time. If you ever get a chance, watch the beginning of the movie Miracle. One of the reasons I like about that film is that it does a really good job of chronicling how brutally pessimistic and cynical the American public was by the late 70s, and why that hockey game was such a big deal. So as I said, one of the breeding grounds for new Hollywood directors and actors and whatnot was independent cinema. And one of the names that's very important in this is Roger Corman. He was given an honorary Oscar in 2009, and he never made anything that was ever nominated by the Academy. He made what are called exploitation films. Exploitation films are movies that are shot very cheaply. They often have violence and sex and nudity, because again, that brings people into the theater. The low budget means that even if it doesn't do incredibly well in the box office, it can still turn a profit. What Roger Corman would do is he would take these guys fresh out of film school who just wanted to make movies, and he would give them a budget of, say, $10,000 and say, go ahead and make this movie. And they were free to make whatever they wanted to, as long as it had some type of nudity or violence or something that he could market, usually nudity. And some of the names that Roger Corman started, you may know Jonathan Demme, Francis Ford Coppola, who directed The Godfather, Ron Howard, who was a child star, a television star, and then now is a director. The first film he directed was for John Corman. John Sayles, James Cameron, Joe Dante, Martin Scorsese, and then also the writers Robert Towne, who wrote Chinatown, and John Sayles, all started their careers for Roger Corman. He also had some actors start for him as well, such as Jack Nicholson, Charles Bronson, Robert De Niro, Sylvester Stallone, Talia Shire, who's in the Godfather, Diane Ladd, and Sandra Bullock. All started their careers working for Roger Corman. So Roger Corman, his studio, I'm not going to tell you they made amazing films. These are the growing pains for a lot of these directors and actors and actresses, but they may not have gotten their start had it not been for him. So he's a very important figure in New Hollywood for the sake of starting all of these careers. To give you an illustration of what a Roger Corman film is all about, here is the trailer for Death Race 2000. Death Race 2000, made in a shoestring budget. You'll see a very young Sylvester Stallone before he made Rocky. And this is the high quality of film that Roger Corman was churning out. But keep in mind, you know, everyone has to start somewhere. It's easy to goof on these pictures, but this guy is very important for starting several fine careers.
The year 2000. America is a vast speedway. People line the streets to witness the greatest drivers on earth in a race from sea to shining sea.
This is a death race.
You finish first, or not at all. Death Race 2000. Every car a deadly weapon. Every spectator a potential point. It's a cross-country road wreck, and the traffic is murder.
Who are you, anyway?
The best driver on earth.
I don't want you to die.
He was built by the world's finest surgeons to drive the fastest car ever designed, and nothing can stop him now. Death Race 2000, rated R.
A few weeks ago we watched The Killing. It's a Stanley Kubrick film, and Stanley Kubrick is kind of the island of misfit toys in New Hollywood. He started his career in the studio, but he didn't work his way up to the studio. He started out as a director. He had made a film on his own with money largely donated from his parents, who were doctors in New York, and Stanley Kubrick has kind of always been a director. Eventually, after Spartacus, and he tried to get Lolita off the ground, he eventually said to hell with the studio system, and left America and emigrated to England, where he made Dr. Strangelove, and then hit his stride in the New Hollywood era. He made some of the great films, including 2001: A Space Odyssey, A Clockwork Orange, Barry Lyndon, The Shining, Full Metal Jacket, and Eyes Wide Shut, all of them in England. Like I said, we've already watched The Killing, so I don't want to dwell too much on Kubrick, but this is the beginning of a documentary about Stanley Kubrick called A Life in Pictures that shows a lot of his artistry, and he really is a wonderful filmmaker. If you ever get a chance, you will not go wrong watching Stanley Kubrick films.
It was magnificent.
One of his pictures are equivalent to 10 of somebody else's.
Oh, Nicole. And shake his head.
Do you know him? And nobody ever really knew him.
He was known as a kind of future threat.
One of the all-time great motion picture makers.
A future threat to peace and quiet.
Legendary. Meanness.
There were times he drove me crazy.
He was a very lovable individual.
I love him 1 minute, and the next minute I hate him. I could kill him.
Perhaps the most intelligent person I've ever met.
He got fascinated with Nescafe commercials.
Have you seen the film Groundhog Day?
Because they told stories so fast.
Well, that's what it was like.
This man was born to push the envelope.
There is still a part of Stanley that's a great mystery to me.
And he always pushed the envelope.
And you must expect someone like that to be different from the rest of us.
I think we were too scared of him over here.
Everybody pretty much acknowledges he's the man. And I still feel that underrates him.
Francis Ford Coppola will always be on the list of America's great directors because he directed the Godfather trilogy. Now, Godfathers Part 1 and 2 were new Hollywood classics. We're going to watch, obviously, the first Godfather. If you ever get a chance, Godfather Part 2 is as good as, if not even better than, the first Godfather. Godfather 3, as you can see, came much, much later. But in his stride, in his prime, he directed some wonderful films. He followed up his Godfather movies with Apocalypse Now, which is one of the great Vietnam films. He also directed a movie called The Conversation, which he directed the same year as Godfather Part 2. Phenomenal movie. If you've ever seen movies like Enemy of the State or something along those lines, Paranoid, conspiracy films, The Conversation, one of those. And then because his kids really liked the novels, he directed 2 adaptations of S.E. Hinton books, The Outsiders and Rumblefish. He has been kind of bopping around ever since then. Has not had any really huge monumental hits really since Apocalypse Now. But anyway, we're going to take a look at The Godfather. Really, really, really wonderful director. In a couple weeks, we're going to take a look at Goodfellas, directed by Martin Scorsese. Martin Scorsese is another very important name in the gangster genre. His first big film was Mean Streets, which is a gangster tale of these guys running around in New York City. He has followed that up with Taxi Driver, Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Raging Bull, you can read. Wonderful filmmaker. He has maintained his high level of artistry and personal films since the 70s. It took him quite a long time to win his first Best Director Oscar for The Departed in 2006, but he has made several remarkable gangster pictures as well as other pictures. Like I said, we'll talk more about Scorsese when we have a chance to take a look at Goodfellas. A director who had a white-hot career that significantly cooled down was Peter Bogdanovich. Peter Bogdanovich is another guy who got a start for Roger Corman in making some really, really bad films for Roger Corman. But he hit his stride in the 70s and made a movie called The Last Picture Show. Now, The Last Picture Show is often regarded as one of the best films of the 70s. It does a wonderful job of chronicling kind of the downbeat, cynical attitude of the early 70s. Even though the film is set in the early 50s, it's really about the 70s. It's a really very good film about, the loss of innocence, not just for the characters, but for America. A lot of metaphor, a lot of symbolism. He then followed that up with a movie called What's Up, Doc?, which is basically an homage and a remake of a movie called Bringing Up Baby, which was popular in the 30s. It starred Katharine Hepburn and Cary Grant. But What's Up, Doc? Starred Barbara Streisand, a wonderful film, and then Paper Moon, which is a Depression-era father-son or father-daughter movie. Very, very good. In the 80s, he made a film that was critically acclaimed called Mask, but then he just kind of, he hasn't really had a lot of hits. One of the last things that he has done is a movie that he made directly for ESPN in 2004 called Hustle, which is the Pete Rose story. But beyond Peter Bogdanovich's directorial career, he has also become one of Hollywood's premier film historians. In the picture you see on the slide, that is him hanging out with Orson Welles, the director of Citizen Kane. And on the Citizen Kane DVD, Peter Bogdanovich does one of the audio commentaries. So even though he may not be one of the biggest name directors today, he is very big in the realm of Hollywood history. This is the trailer for The Last Picture Show.
And melt your cold, cold heart.
Tony Bennett's Cold, Cold Heart was on everybody's hit parade. Elizabeth Taylor was getting married. Boys wore ducktails. The police action in the Far East was Korea. And Anarene, Texas, like other small towns, is approaching the end of an era.
I heard about the ball game last night. 121-14. Must be pretty near a record.
What you think he'd do if he found us?
Shoot us, probably. But, Mama, it's a sin, isn't it? Unless you're married, you know I wouldn't do that.
Don't be so mealy-mouthed.
Tough it out. Tough it out. You gotta be men like the rest of them. Ain't none of you pretty enough to be women. You boys can get on out of here. I don't want to have no more to do with you. I've been around that trashy behavior all my life. I'm getting tired of putting up with it.
Oh, quit prison. I don't think you did it right anyway. Honey?
What?
That's a lie. I'll stay with her all night one of these nights, too. She done promised.
You won't either.
Yes, I will. Why shouldn't I?
What happened? I'm not sorry for you. You'd have left Billy, too, just like you left me. I bet you left him plenty of nights. Whenever J.C. whistled.
So long, buddy. So long, buddy. Be careful. I'll take care of the mercury for you.
I'll see you in a year or two if I don't get shot.
You wouldn't believe how this country's changed. I reckon the reason why I always drag you out here is probably I'm just as sentimental as the next fella when it comes to old times. Old times.
Anarene, Texas, 1951. Nothing much has changed.
Your cold, cold heart.
An import from Europe and then back to Europe was Roman Polanski. Roman Polanski grew up in Poland. His parents went to a concentration camp. His father survived, his mother did not. When he was reunited with his father, his stepmother did not want him around, so they basically sent him away. He eventually made his way to the Polish Film Academy, where he learned how to make films. You want to talk about guts? This guy was under the rule of Soviet Russia, and he made films that made fun of Soviet Russia with Soviet Russia's money. Luckily, he did it in such a clever, sly way that he did not get sent away to a gulag, but a lot of people in the West started to really like Roman Polanski's films, and so he went to France, and he made a couple of films, including Repulsion, Cul-de-sac, and The Fearless Vampire Killers. Repulsion is a wonderful horror film. Cul-de-sac is a great exploration of basically suburban middle-class life. And then The Fearless Vampire Killers is a very, very, very dark comedy, funny comedy about guys that are hunting vampires. He came over to the States and signed with Paramount and made the movie Rosemary's Baby, which was incredibly controversial. You want to talk about downbeat ending. Spoiler alert. At the end of the movie, Rosemary gives birth to the spawn of Satan. It's not exactly an uplifting film. His wife, Sharon Tate, was actually one of the people killed by Charles Manson's followers. He went into semi-retirement and was coaxed out of retirement by, of all people, Hugh Hefner, who wanted to kind of go upscale from Playboy magazine and decided he wanted to be a film producer, and he produced a version of Macbeth. At the time, Roman Polanski's Macbeth was, was criticized because he had naked women in it. Amazingly enough, it was produced by Playboy, Hugh Hefner, and he had naked women in it. Today, it is regarded as one of the greatest Shakespearean adaptations ever filmed, but at the time, it was dismissed. Then, after Macbeth, he made the movie Chinatown, which is one of the great films of the 70s, and really one of the great films in film history, in my humble opinion. Chinatown is what qualifies as what's called neo-noir. Film noir is an interesting genre. We kind of talked a little bit about it. We talked about The Killing. Film noir was kind of an accident. It was just kind of the zeitgeist of the 40s. But by the 70s, it was being done on purpose. So kind of the classic film noir was accidental. And then beginning with the 70s, movies like Chinatown and The Long Kiss Goodnight and all this, or Long Kiss Goodbye, you have making film noir on purpose, and that's called neo-noir. So this is a scene from Chinatown, which starred Jack Nicholson. This did not win Best Picture, nor did it win Best Actor, because they were both lost to Godfather Part 2. 1974 is a very good year for film. But what you'll see in this scene is Roman Polanski. He's the one with the knife, and he's the one who does the cutting, as you'll see. This is a very graphic scene, I want to warn you, very much a rated R scene, and definitely an indelible image. Very quickly before we get to that, though, after Chinatown, Roman Polanski was hanging out at Jack Nicholson's house. Jack Nicholson has always been a big-time partier, and at his party, Roman Polanski ended up photographing and then having sexual relations with a 13-year-old girl. That is illegal in this country, and so he fled this country, and Roman Polanski no longer lives in America. He lives in France, and all of his films after Chinatown have been made in Europe.
Son of a bitch. That damn Florsheim shoe.
Hold it there, kitty cat. Hold it.
Hello, Claude. Where'd you get the midget?
You're a very nosy fellow, kitty cat, huh? You know what happens to nosy fellows? Huh? No? Wanna guess? Huh? No? Okay. They lose their noses. Next time you lose the whole thing. Cut it off and feed it to my goldfish. Understand? Understand?
I understand, Gil.
I understand.
All right.
William Friedkin made some Friedkin awesome movies in the 1970s. He directed The French Connection, which won Best Picture and won him Best Director. It is the story of Popeye Doyle. Gene Hackman, who we saw in Bonnie and Clyde, stars as this hard-boiled, no-nonsense cop. It's very similar to Dirty Harry, which also came out around that time, but with a little bit higher degree of artistry. If you ever get a chance, if you like cop movies, if you like action movies, The French Connection is a wonderful film. It's got one of the best car chase sequences of all time. He followed that up with The Exorcist. Again, to give you an idea of how cynical and how pessimistic American audiences were and how America was, The Exorcist came out Christmas Day, 1973, and it ended up grossing over $100 million in the box office. It is a movie about the devil possessing a little girl. It is very, very, very much an R-rated film. And again, scored William Friedkin a huge blockbuster success and critical acclaim.
Begone! In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, by this sign of the Holy Cross of our Lord Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with the Father and the Holy Spirit. Damien!
Amen.
God, defender of the human race. Oh, look down in pity.
You killed your
on
mother.
This your servant.
You left her alone to
Ready
die.
raise
Shut
the-
up! I'll never forgive you.
Rebel, O Lord,
Shut up!
the devil's power.
Bastard! Oh!
I command you, by the judge of the living and the dead, to depart from the servant of God. It's the power. Holy water. Oh. It's the power of Christ that compels you. The power of Christ 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 compels you. He brought you low by his blood-stained cross. Do not despise my command because you know me to be a sinner.
John Cassavetes is an actor. He was in movies like The Dirty Dozen, also in Rosemary's Baby. And what I really respect about John Cassavetes is that instead of blowing his money on cars and drugs and planes and all that kind of stuff, he sunk his money into independent movies. And was an independent filmmaker working mostly in New York City. And so he had a string of these independent films. A Woman Under the Influence is one of the great independent film stories. It was nominated for Best Picture, even though it was up against very stiff competition in the year 1974. But John Cassavetes, wonderful director in this style. Again, kind of an oddball because he didn't go to film school, but again, we got to respect a guy who could have spent his money on whatever he wanted to, yet decided to spend his money making movies. Milos Forman is another import like Polanski, but he is imported from Czechoslovakia. And Milos Forman is very much in love with the idea of American freedom. However, kind of spoiler alert, Milos Forman understands that freedom comes with a price. And so often in a Milos Forman film, you have a very big rebellious main character, kind of larger than life, a guy who doesn't play by the rules, who very much embraces and embodies the idea of American freedom, and then towards the end, he usually dies. So big time spoiler alert. If you've ever seen any of his films, his biggest was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. That was one of the big 3 movies to ever sweep the major Oscars at the Academy Awards. Got Jack Nicholson a Best Actor Oscar. Critically acclaimed. The public loved it. Wonderful film. If you have not seen One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, you're missing one of the great American films.
All right, Chief. You're our last chance. What do you say, huh? Just raise your hand up. That's all we need from you today, Chief. Just raise your hand up one time. Show her that you can do it. Just show her that you can still do it. Just raise your hand up. All the guys have got them up. Just raise your hand up, Chief, will you? Huh? Come on. There's got to be one guy in here that's not a total fucking nut. Mac? Chief! The Chief! Ah! Chief! Nurse Ratchet! Nurse Ratchet, look! Look! The Chief put his hand up. The Chief put his hand up. Look, he voted. Would you please turn the television set on? The Chief has got his hand up right there. The Chief voted. Now, will you please turn the television set on?
Mr. McMurphy, the meeting was adjourned and the vote was closed.
But the vote was 10-8. The Chief, he's got his hand up. Look!
No, Mr. McMurphy. When the meeting was adjourned, the vote was 9-9.
Ah, come on. You're not going to say that now. You're not going to say that now. You're going to pull that henhouse shit now. When the vote the Chief just voted, it was 10-9. Now, I want that television set turned on right now!
You don't need your chair. What you need is a mop. You gotta get that should work. Keswick. Come on. Come on. Come on. No, you have a work assignment. Mr. Harding, please.
Yeah. Koufax kicks. He delivers. It's up the middle. It's a base hit. Richardson is rounding first. He's going for second. The ball's in the deep right center. Davison over in the corner, cut the ball off. Here comes the throw. Richardson rounding first. He goes into second. He slides. He's in there. He's safe. It's a double. He's in there, Martin. Look at Richardson. He's on second base. Koufax is in big fucking trouble. Big trouble, baby. All right. Here's Tresh is the next batter. Tresh looks in. Koufax. Koufax gets the signs from Roseboro. He kicks once, he pumps, he fires. It's a strike. Koufax's curveball is snapping off like a fucking firecracker. All right, here he comes with the next pitch. Tresh swings. It's a long fly ball to deep left center. It's going. It's going. Somebody get me a fucking wiener before I die. I gotta get my belly feeling. Where is it? All right. Kovacs looks down. He's looking at the great Mickey Mantle now. Yeah. Here comes the pitch. Mantle swings. It's a fucking home run.
Gentlemen, stop this immediately.
Sidney Lumet had a really interesting career. He started off working in television and then made it to Hollywood and released a wonderful studio film called 12 Angry Men, which starred Henry Fonda as a juror. And basically it's the story of these jurors who get together. It's based on a Broadway play. These jurors who get together, and Henry Fonda is the juror who realizes that this kid's being railroaded, and a wonderful, tight, courtroom drama. Then he had the bad situation, reteaming with Henry Fonda, and made a movie called Failsafe. Now, Failsafe should have been a wonderful film about Cold War paranoia, and about what could happen if we accidentally started World War III and all this stuff. However, it came out the same year and around the same time as Dr. Strangelove. Dr. Strangelove, the Stanley Kubrick film, basically does the exact same thing but with dark humor and satire. And so basically Failsafe was the serious version of Dr. Strangelove. And of course Dr. Strangelove is one of the American Film Institute 100 Greatest Films, all blah blah blah. And Failsafe has kind of been largely forgotten. And so it was, as the kids would call it today, an epic fail. And so he went back into television and directed several television movies and series and whatnot, and then got another break and came back into movies and made the movie Serpico. Now Serpico took Al Pacino, who we saw in The Godfather, we'll see in The Godfather, and basically let him curse for the entire movie. Serpico in its day set the bar for the amount of F words in a movie. It's the gritty story, a true life story of a guy who is an undercover cop and whatnot, and kind of put Sidney Lumet back on the national consciousness. He made a wonderful, wonderful adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express, a movie called Dog Day Afternoon, which once again stars Al Pacino. It's a bank robbery gone wrong. Very good film. And my personal favorite is a movie called Network, which is a very harsh, cynical look at network television. I'm going to show you the most famous scene from Network in just a few moments. Again, if you're going into television, if you like TV history, at some point do yourself a favor and watch the movie Network. He also made The Wiz. The Wiz was produced by Berry Gordy and Motown Records. And The Wiz is based on a Broadway play, which is basically The Wizard of Oz, but with an all-black cast. And instead of starting in Kansas and going off to Oz, the movie starts in Harlem, and basically Dorothy goes to Manhattan. Wonderful film, a lot of tongue-in-cheek humor, yet at the same time this kind of gritty, a very gritty look at New York City of that time.
The first attempt on President Ford's life was 18 days ago, and again yesterday in San Francisco. In spite of the two attempts, Mr. Ford says he will not become a prisoner of the Oval Office, a hostage of would-be assassins.
The American people are good people. Democrats, independents, Republicans, and others.
How the hell you always get mixed up with
no circumstances will I, and I hope no other, capitulate to those that want to undercut what's all good in America.
Q. Howard. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like at this moment to announce that I will be retiring from this program in 2 weeks' time because of poor ratings. Since this show was the only thing I had going for me in my life, I have decided to kill myself.
So what'd she say?
I'm going to blow my brains out right on this program a week from today.
10 seconds to commercial.
So tune in next Tuesday. That should give the public relations people a week to promote the show. We ought to get a hell of a rating out of that.
Roll telecine.
50 share. Easy.
Take telecine.
When you're having
Listen,
a great time.
Did you hear that?
What was that about?
Howard just said he was going to blow his brains out next Tuesday.
What are you talking about?
Didn't you hear him? He just said...
No.
Howard just said he was going to kill himself next Tuesday.
What do you mean Howard just said he was going to kill himself next Tuesday?
He was supposed to do a tag on Ron Ness and
He said, tune in next Tuesday. I'm gonna shoot myself.
What the hell's going on?
I don't know. He just said he was going to blow his brains out.
What the fuck's going on, Howard?
We want to know what the fuck is going on, Howard.
I can't hear you.
Turn the studio mic on.
We're back on in 11 seconds.
10 seconds.
Ready to.
Howard, what the hell are you doing? Have you flipped or what?
I think we better get him off.
Get him off.
What's the matter with you fellas? Get your fucking hands
Fucking
off.
sound off, you stupid son of a bitch! He's going offline!
We're in a lot of
fucking trouble down here!
This is the dumbest
That's my
thing I've ever
fucking
seen.
head you're grabbing.
Gotta stand by
This
this!
is my fucking head, dumb schmuck.
In a different time, different people around me. I'm on my way to find the Wiz. He's gonna get me back home.
Oh, that's nice. Thank you. And good luck.
The genius who created me only took care of my dashing good looks, my razor-sharp wit, and my irresistible attraction to the wrong women. What he forgot was a heart.
A lion without any courage. Oh!
Can you help us, sir?
What's in it for me?
We'd be very grateful.
Yuck, 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 yuck.
Here it is. Come on now, ease on down the road. Come on, ease on down the road. Don't you care?
Mama would be so proud. Going to see the Wiz.
When I wake up in the afternoon, what you please if me to do? Don't nobody bring me no bad news. I wake up all red and negative, and I'm buying up my views. So don't nobody bring me no bad news.
An announcement from the great and powerful Oz.
Send up the one with the silver slippers.
Everybody be glad, 'cause the sun is shining just for us.
Everybody wake up into the morning into happiness. Oh, wow, it's like a different way of living now. And thank the world, we always knew that we'd be free somehow.
You wanted to meet the wizard.
Maybe times when you wish you wasn't born, and you wake one morning just to find Mr. gone. You know that feeling only lasts a little while. You just stick with us, and we'll show you how to smile, yeah. Get 'em up, go down. Ease on down. Get 'em up, go down.
Some of the other big films that kind of capture the zeitgeist of the 70s is Midnight Cowboy. Midnight Cowboy is special because that's the only X-rated film to ever win Best Picture, even though once it won, it was re-released as R. I know I said that last week. Nashville is a really good film, kind of. It's a very long film. It's a pseudo-documentary. It's not an actual documentary, but it feels like a documentary. It's kind of ahead of its time. All the actors and all the actresses have to sing and write their own songs. It's got this huge cast, kind of an epic scope. It's a really interesting film to see. And of course the movie All the President's Men, based on the book of the same title, stars Robert Redford and Dustin Hoffman as Woodward and Bernstein, who uncover the Watergate scandal. Very good film. And then, of course, you have your genre films. I don't want you to walk away from tonight thinking that all of the movies that were produced in the 1970s were awesome. These, for the most part, weren't. You have your hippie films that are movies about people getting high, like Cheech and Chong became big stars in the 70s. You have what are called the blaxploitation films, which is like an exploitation film, but instead of exploiting nudity, it's exploiting basically stereotypes of African Americans. The first was Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song. That is not a typo. And then you had your disaster films, movies like Airport, The Poseidon Adventure, The Towering Inferno. These movies where you have people trapped in some type of inescapable situation.